Ladies and gentlemen and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. My name is Rotten Deadite, and with me today are...
I am James, also known as Aramithius.
And I'm Felix, also known as Banu Hana Masaishi.
And the White Gar will be with us shortly. His internet decided to crap itself, so he'll be here shortly. Today we're doing Sermon 27, which we have actually done on the stream before. I don't think I bothered to record it, but I did do a live stream while I was trying to push through to the last bit of the commentary for the New Worldling School and Sermon 27, so some of this stuff is going to be familiar to you guys. If you were here during that, we had a grand old time trying to figure out ways to explain ridiculously complicated concepts about truth and the nature of language, and Tordir was and Felix Arony were two big contributors to that, so once again I want to thank them. So Sermon 27 comes after, and this is going to be a revelation, but it comes after Sermon 26. I know.
Wow.
I know, yeah. Sermon 26 being the Pokemon lesson.
Yes. It's like it's Pokemon.
The gasp. And Sermon, but because Sermon 26 deals heavily with magic and the nature of magic and the connection between magic and speech, which we didn't really get a chance to explain properly in 26, and to be honest with you, I still can't explain it. Sermon 27 deals again with a great deal of things about speech and magic. Sermon 27 also grants a point in the speech skill, so you're going to be hearing a lot about that. However, I was kind of hoping to have Ziegler here today, but he wasn't able to make it because there is a... James, maybe you know a little bit about this. There is a connection between the spoken word of God, or there's a difference in the Christians tend to draw a difference. I think Judeo-Christians might draw a connection, a dividing line between the idea of the will of God and the word of God. These can be considered to be two connected but separate concepts.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll unpack them a bit more closer to it, but there's also the line of particularly within John's Gospel, where Christ is the Word of God. The Word became flesh.
Right.
In the incarnate Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
I was wondering if you could. Well, yeah. Do you think we should get into the sermon a little bit before we start talking about that? Okay, good.
Yeah, let's
especially given the first line of the sermon.
Okay, well, the sermon is called the Scripture of the Word. We talked a lot about in previous sermons about the word or the sword. And we did talk a lot about the sword in previous sermons, especially in the Treasure Wood sword, where we talked about the symbol of the sword in the 36 lessons, symbolizing arguably the division of or the self-improvement, and also the removal of negative things or things that hold you back, or
Yep, we have
Lucas
a sub.
Skywalker. Hey, thank you very much. Thanks for the sub. I appreciate your Bezos bucks. There was the sword as a symbol can represent a lot of things, but I frequently brought up the idea of self-improvement and Vivec's concept of removing the wheat from the chaff as the thresher of the Garden of Veloth, etc. And there was some things in some somewhat Jungian concepts about the first half of your life being dedicated to the sword, being dedicated to warfare or discipline, etc. And then one of the big puzzles for me, philosophical puzzles in the 36 lessons, is then trying to figure out why the sword and the word are considered to be opposites. Because as a concept, the sword has a huge, wide. Yes.
I have I have a quick and simple answer there, which might actually be it, because the sword is something that cuts, it divides, it separates. Right. It's also an instrument of conflict.
Right.
Whereas words, and we'll get to this when we talk about language being based on meat, we'll just kind of segue into that. But I whenever I think about words and their meanings and so on, I cannot help but just dive for my Wittgenstein. And he was convinced, Ludwig Wittgenstein was basically convinced that language was entirely socially constructed. You cannot have a language with just one person who speaks it, basically.
Was he also the one who said that language is use?
Probably.
Because it sounds like something he'd say.
Yeah. He came up with, I can't remember the precise argumentation for it, and I really should have looked it up beforehand, but he talks about language games and the fact that every language has a context and how it's used, and that it's almost an emergent property of society. And the reason that I think of that as being the opposite to the sword is that it's a cooperative thing. It's a thing that is worked upon with other people, whereas the sword is something that separates and is inherently involved with conflict. You need to cooperate in order to speak, in order to use words properly, because of how language works.
That is something that Jung pointed out, is that the first half of the life you spend working on yourself, the second half of the life you spend contributing back into culture and society. And that makes a whole hell of a lot of sense, to be honest. Conflict and diplomacy. That's a good way to put it. It is very much that does kind of crystallize things a little bit. Unfortunately, there's another line in here that's going to be it's going to throw us. It'll throw
there
us.
Always is.
But anyway,
that's what we do.
So the first line is all language is based on meat, which is what James was just talking about. We had. It was one of the. I make a note in the New Whirling School about it's how one of those lines. The first time I read the 36 lessons, I read that line and went, "What the finger fucking crap is this?" It definitely
the hot,
stuck
crispy
out.
Kentucky Fried Fuck did I just read?
Yeah. We can say that all language is based on meat in the respect that it is a living thing. Language is a living thing and will rot if it's not used, if it's bereft of life. Maybe it's based on meat because it comes from living beings, and as such carries with it all the flaws of intrinsic to mortality, which I agree with. But it is also based on, it can be said that it's based on meat in the respect that it has to be tasted or consumed or eaten in the terminology of Vivec's, which we're gonna deal with. Yes?
Well, no, this reminds me of a little side note is feel free then, listeners and viewers, to apply that to the Seisi when they say we ate it to become it.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so the next line is, do not let the sophists fool you. A sophist, really quick, is a teacher of philosophy and rhetoric. That a sophist would say otherwise, I think, is probably because they would suggest something like language is truth, or I was going to use the word perfect, but that's probably not appropriate.
It's also kind of counter to how the word is used. Mm-hmm. If you think about the term sophistry in general, it's generally just kind of empty showmanship almost. Yeah. Mm-hmm. is how it generally gets used. If you think about the pre-Socratic sophists in the philosophical sense, Plato and the Platonic mouthpiece that is Socrates railed against the sophists because they were literally just teaching rhetoric to be good at it and just to achieve a goal. Right. And Plato's thing about reality was that it was a pale shadow of an ideal other realm. So he was sort of pure rationalist in that sense. I don't know whether this is a case of I was trying to think and compare sophistry to unsophists in the traditional philosophical sense to this, and I would absolutely think that that sophists would actually agree with the idea of all language is based on meat at the core of it, because it's to get stuff done is why they taught rhetoric, why they were to be good at stuff. So there's part of me that's just wondering, did Kirkbride just get sophists and Plato confused? bluntly.
Yeah.
I don't
like
know,
the word
because
better, maybe?
the two get lumped together because they're both ancient Greek philosophy.
Yeah, and I like a sophist doesn't necessarily mean an ancient Greek philosopher, but I just feel like that's kind of what he meant. Like I feel like
there's inherent truth in language is what it feels like he's railing against with that whole sentence.
Right. And that's actually what most of this sermon is going to be talking about, is the lack of truth in language.
Yeah.
So second, the third walking path explores hysteria without fear. Here we're talking about the third walking way, which I suggest is attaining divinity through the dragon break.
Okay.
Yeah. In the respect that it is the use of... I would suggest that the 36 Lessons of Vivec are the third walking path, or an example of the third walking path. It's a document, words or lies, you could say, spoken during the dragon break when it is impossible to tell the truth from lies, and that it becomes truth because of the nature of the way dragon breaks are stitched back together again. That's my suggestion. That's the way I'm interpreting it. There isn't really anything that really spells out the third walking way in plain language. We get a couple of clues, but nothing really super.
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering what the distinction between hysteria and fear is with this.
I explained that.
Yeah.
So hysteria without fear is okay. So I based this on a post in the official Elder Scrolls forum that Michael Kirkbride wrote called "On Aldmeri Ancestor Worship," which was written in character by Vivec. And in this post, he talks about people who refuse to consider the connections they have to their predecessors and instead try to desperately to create little narratives, air quote, from recent events that describe their success in a way that makes it completely their own. On the subject of this desire to disregard all causal logic, Vivec says, it becomes akin to sensory deprivation, yet without fear, for we sense things that remind us of the dawn. So I suggested that this separation from their ancestors allows these madmen to create their own narratives, to reinvent themselves free of the deeds of those who have come before them. This must be done in a state where causal logic does not exist, because this reinvention cannot happen without ignoring the phenomenon of cause and effect in the linear sense upon which logic depends. So
okay, so it's taking hysteria in the sense of irrationality.
Exactly. Yeah. Irrationality and insanity in a point where cause and effect, in a condition where cause and effect no longer exists. That's kind of what I think he meant by hysteria. And so to live in that state without fear means to be calm and in control of your faculties and able to exert your will upon it. And that's what I think the 36 lessons are. Is Vivec doing that?
Yeah. In several different ways as well, because if you I mean, I'm trying to dance around the fact that hysteria is a horrible word, but it's just the idea of being frenetic in your activity is how I think about hysteria. It's trying to do lots of things at once, and so it's the idea of doing lots of which again links into the dragon break and so on. So it's doing multiple things all at the same time and just juggling an awful lot. And so it also kind of ties back to the descriptions of is it in Vec's teaching where Chin gets described as kind of trying to hold everything together in a particular way. I can't remember the exact phrasing.
Are you thinking about when Vivec is asked about divinity?
No, no. It's specifically about the state of what Chin's supposed to be, and kind of trying to do all sorts of things and just holding it together very delicately.
Sorry, I don't remember.
All this stuff. Oh, okay.
And Andrew suggests we talk about the root word of hysteria,
which is womb. This is why women were always accused of being hysterical, because it was a way to put women down and say this is a purely feminine condition, and it's just basically
an angry woman. It must be hysteria,
and can therefore be freely dismissed. But yes, if you're going with sensory deprivation and hysteria being a womb. Yeah, it all clicks.
It's starting to call
ready
kind of
for right reaching.
Yeah.
Oh,
wink. Wait, nudge, nudge. Hey, say no more.
Say no more.
So the efforts of
these sermons are so ridiculously horny and yet brimming with fascinating stuff. Like, it's unreal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The efforts of I was about to say ridiculously horny and filled with interesting stuff is pretty much a good description of Kirkbride, but all
right. We have fun here.
So the efforts of madmen. Have you read the Canterbury Tales? Yeah, thank you. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. This woman won't stop bothering me about sex and other filthy things. She's clearly hysterical. The efforts
and that's considered classic literature.
The efforts of madmen are a society of itself, but only if they are written. So, okay. So the efforts of madmen, we kind of already know. I hope Mojo is still here. We already know about one of these madmen. Mankar Cameron, who used the Mehrunes razor to sever his ties with his ancestors and recreate himself according to his own will. He did not have the benefit of a dragon break in order to do it, but he did have the astonishing willpower of one of the most destructive Daedric princes in the universe. By destroying his ancestral bonds, he rebuilt himself according to his whims, achieving a state of existence he considered closer to perfection, a new level of power so expansive that he could wield the Amulet of Kings as though he were dragonborn. Also, gained like about 2.5 feet in height and looks like an Altmer.
Yeah, and he also, if he's talking about he who enters paradise enters his own mother, I'll refer you back to the conversation we just had about the womb and everything else. It's
yeah, it's all making sense.
Yeah.
This is this is a really concerning state we've gotten into where the 36 lessons are starting to add up.
Yeah. And everything's making sense with everything else. There is also part of me that's just desperate to sort of drag Foucault into that sentence, but I don't know whether it entirely fits because the reason I say that is I can't remember the precise name of the book, but it's something like Madness in Society. It's that the idea of how madness is treated by society thoroughly changes, just and it goes from they're treated as something that has their own sort of specific wisdom in olden times, and so that they had that sort of potentially shamanistic way of looking at it, through to the kind of they're dangerous, they need to be locked away, it can't be contained, and so on. And now it's the idea of this is a self-improvement thing, this is something that is medicalized, understood, given a typology, and all those sorts of things. So it sort of changes, and how and kind of how the mad see themselves is barely is barely talked about. And I don't know whether that's something that he really mentions, but I just want to sort of flag that as a thing. But I also just because you're instantly kind of leaping to the idea of madmen as the ones who are trying to achieve enlightenment or whatever, with applying it to Cameron. I'm not sure whether that's necessarily the case.
I think I was trying to. I might have been trying to do that. I think I was also trying to equate madmen with people who were operating within a state of either chim or a dragon break. But I don't think I kept a hold of that idea very well. Like I think I got distracted and started thinking about it differently while I was writing the commentaries on this. So like I kind of bounced around a little bit. The commentaries on the lessons are not as tight as they should be, and I do need to. I need to get back there and get back into them again. But
yeah. I feel like there's something more to that the idea of what a society is, because a society is again a group of individuals. It comes back to all languages based on meat. The idea of society being something that's self-referential, or that needs a referent, that needs to have things that it relates to in order to function. But I'm not and so the idea of if they're written, is that something that's kind of the word and the sword? I don't know whether the word is something that's a written word exclusively in the 36 lessons. It feels like a sort of a thing he would do, but it feels a little too narrow.
Yeah, I don't know if Well, it's interesting you should say that, because in a later sermon there appears to be some importance put on the act of Vivec writing her memoirs in black ink, and there seems to be like some symbolism happening there that I haven't really had a chance to fully explore yet.
Well, I think something we need to remember is that Vivec is the warrior poet,
yeah,
wielding both sword and word.
Mm-hmm.
And if we think about what Sophistry says at the end of Clockwork City about how Vivec wants to be all things at all times,
right?
And Vivec is innately a duality personified.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I mean, like I said in chat earlier, I think the word is diplomacy, talking to people, and you know, maybe it's revelry, or maybe it's, you know, poetry, or maybe it's theory, whatever, or maybe not theory in the Vex case.
Could you make the argument that there's the difference between the spoken language and the written language is that the spoken language is communication between people, but the written language is the weaponization of communication? In other words, law and propaganda history.
Yeah.
No.
In a sense. But I also think of the word posterity too.
Okay. All right.
So that's just a matter of keeping record.
Yeah.
I mean, what are these cuneiform tablets we keep finding these days?
Writing is the,
you know, it's essentially just complaining Yelp reviews on cuneiform tablets.
Yeah.
I've
been seeing those. Yeah, those are great.
And Nasir sold me bad copper.
Yeah, I love it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sir,
No,
the barley is dying. I'm telling you this.
Yes,
like, you need to come and see. Like,
yeah. You have asked me to tell you if the barley is dying, and I am here to tell you the barley is dying.
Apparently, Karen was a very popular name in ancient Mesopotamia.
Karen. I see what you did there.
Or he did a lot of things wrong.
So to answer your question, Chris, I think what I would say is that it's not so much the weaponization of language, but it is turning language into a tool. And as we all know, tools can be used for good or ill. A shovel can be used to beat someone to death.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a couple points on that as well. Because like I've fallen down language and like linguistic script holes at 1 a.m. on Wikipedia before. So I have some thoughts on this.
Excellent.
For starters, something that goes very much unknown in the West is that in Georgia, like the nation of Georgia, not the state, for all the Yankees and Americans watching.
Someone say my name.
There's technically 3 different scripts. There's your kind of common script, the liturgical script, and the royal script that were all like they're done in their own very stylistic ways. And the idea was that the royal script was, of course, for the upper class, the kings, and the royal proclamations. The liturgical script was for the sole use of the monks and the church, which also, being Georgia, is like one of the oldest churches. I think the only church that's older than them is the Armenian Orthodox Church. And then you have like the sort of more common script, which I think, do not quote me on this, but I think that's the one that they have now selected as just like the universal script that everyone everywhere is using. But it means that there were 3 different scripts for the language that all had different people who could or couldn't, or rather shouldn't, use them. So it also informed people's opinions and beliefs about what a certain script was saying, or how it was to be interpreted or potentially revered. And that kind of ties a little bit back to what Andrew was saying about language and being like a record of posterity. The way I view it is written language is a record, whereas spoken language is like it's a reflection of the modern culture. So written language is more like history. Spoken language is more due to modernity. So if you want to think of it as like an actual, record, like a physical, record that you can play, like putting a play on words on the term record, and then you can think of modern language as, say, a live stream. Like there's
Well,
to put it in more modern parlance, that could be a way of viewing it, because what you see already these days is more and more people struggling to read what's still technically considered, for example, modern English, really only as far back as the 1800s. So we're talking like 200 years or so, and it's still modern English, but sometimes the way the words are spelled, or how there's that weird like S that looks more like an F without the mark through it, that throws a lot of people off. And then when you read even older stuff that's still considered modern English, people still struggle with Shakespeare, and we need to have, in some cases, like translations or interpretations in the margins when you're reading like Shakespeare books in high school, even though technically speaking, that's modern English. That's the one that we can most understand, because Middle English, let alone Old English, is very much foreign to all of us. And yet that's still technically our language. And yet, as we're already seeing these days, my generation is struggling to understand certain words and abbreviations that are existing online and being spoken, or just being written in text format. We're like, what are these people saying? And then it has to be broken down by some like ultra online Gen Zer or something. And so already we're seeing a shift where even in like a 30-year time span, not that we can't speak the same language, but that the language is evolving so quickly. And you see people pushing back against this, where like, I'm sorry to say, but boomers at large are just saying like, oh, they're adding these words to the dictionary and I don't like that. And yet they took to the word woke like fucking fire, like it was like, oh, I like this word. Everything's woke these days. Like, do you even know what that means? I know what it makes me feel like it means. I'm like, okay, whatever. That brings us back to language and culture and use. So thanks again, Wittgenstein, you little asshole.
Yeah.
But bringing it back. But like, that
is a word
just kind
already
of part.
existed.
That's just kind of part of the whole thing, though, about like, we're already in this position where the language is moving and changing, and at a faster rate. And while we can still understand it, I'd be willing to put money that by 2050, people would look to like how we're speaking in, say, like when I was a teenager and maybe the 2010s, and it would be very foreign to them. It wouldn't be unintelligible, but it would definitely be extremely different and distinct.
Yeah, although Adlac has pointed out a very funky thing in chat. This is almost a uniquely English thing. I'll just read the thing out because I have nothing else to add. I'm not a philologist. But a large part of that issue, as in English being unintelligible, is a relatively unique phenomenon that occurred in English. The great vowel shift. Medieval French is significantly more readable to modern French speakers because pronunciations have differed relatively less than in English. So, yeah. And yeah, English has an awful lot of evolutions and different roots in a way that quite a few other languages don't. So English is a bizarre mongrel language that doesn't make a lot of sense apart from on its own terms.
Wow, the great vowel shift was so drastic that parents literally couldn't understand their own children. Jesus.
Oh, wow. So
okay.
I know nothing about this great vowel shift. So when did it happen?
That's fascinating that like it happened so suddenly.
Are we talking about Rhodic dialect here?
When did the great vowel shift happen?
Yeah.
That's in
the GVS, the great vowel shift, between 1400 and 1700.
Okay. Ooh.
That would explain modern English,
Yeah.
Well, have you ever
and then Shakespeare sat right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever have you guys ever seen videos of Shakespeare performed in original pronunciation?
Yes.
Yeah.
It sounds very strange.
Almost like it sounds almost more like pirate speak, but like
it's pirate Welsh Australian. It's this weird kind of amalgam of what we can recognize as modern day dialects. And I think that lends itself as a good illustration in how language shifts over time.
Yeah.
And the two main guys who are doing the research on the original pronunciation. As far as I'm aware, they're working through the Globe Theater. They're a father and son combo. Both of them are linguists. My cat's getting all up in my shit, so be prepared for that.
That's his job. Let him have it.
Oh no, cute kitty's on stream.
Hey, hello.
Hey!
I
Jeet
laugh
has wares
because
if you have coin.
I make that joke all the time.
Of course.
But I mean, especially with the advent of advances in communication, like the internet, even things like the Gutenberg press made huge advancements in. I mean, advancements is a bit of a
changes,
but yeah, adjustments to language just because of how readily available language was. Literacy became more common, which means people were reading more, digesting more, speaking more. And it's just something that happens. It's not something we can change. The French have been trying for years.
Yeah.
They I remember the tour guide I had in Paris. He said,
James, what did I tell you about that?
Yes, you did.
Right when we went live, just as we went live, I was telling James, just told James out of the blue, okay, and stop all that racist talk about the French.
Any excuse.
He wasn't saying anything, and I was just like, stop being so racist against the French, James. It's like, what?
It's like, it's in my blood. I'm an Englishman.
Yeah, I'm English. We're allowed. There's a document.
Only since the 18th century or so.
Right.
Having worked through the Civil War era, the Spanish were the great boogeymen. But anyway.
Yeah.
Well, so I think it's like a government institution that they work on trying to keep the purity of the French language.
Yes, yes, they do.
So they avoid borrowings from other languages.
Right.
English don't do that at all. Words like bikini and bento box.
But look at the Germans, man. They'll
pajamas.
They'll put a 50 letters together rather than use somebody else's word for something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember the tour guide. He told me what the official French term was for a selfie stick.
Oh.
And it was like this long, like self-held photographical apparatus. It was like this long thing in French. It was like a whole set. So it was like,
what's the German word for telephone? Fahrsprecher.
The German
speaker.
German word for butterfly. German word for butterfly is Schmetterling.
Schmetterling, yeah.
Although the mobile phone is handy.
Yeah, it's a handy.
German.
It's a handy. You have a handy.
Okay, while we're still like way off topic, and I'm loving it, by the way. But while we're on this, I do have a few other things to say as well. About language that kind of ties into something we had just sort of briefly mentioned near the top of this episode, which is that another curious thing that happens with language and brings back to why like language is very much a social construct is that you can get pidgin languages, which are just like by virtue of a sheer necessity to communicate with people who don't understand you. And then if there's enough exposure and if enough of those speakers decide to start actually really cementing and improving more grammatical rules, then it becomes a Creole language.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of like, there's a few pidgin languages out today, but a lot of pidgin languages are extinct. Because either they became a proper Creole language or for whatever reason, due to conquest or a lack of contact anymore, the necessity of speaking that hybrid pidgin language died out. So for example, a dead pidgin language is the Algonquin Basque pidgin that was spoken because of Basque whalers and fishermen around the Atlantic coast. And so speaking with groups like the Beothuk, the Mi'kmaq, and certain other groups like the North Shore of Quebec, like the Naskapi and the Innu, a kind of like hybrid pidgin was formed between the two to facilitate very basic rudimentary communication, which also speaks to another aspect of language that maybe we don't talk about and haven't mentioned yet about instead of just being a purely collaborative thing, sometimes it's necessary, even if you have to kind of brute force it to share some kind of communication. And that's why also things can be lost in translation, because you may not try and get the specific, but you know that there's a word that this person might know to say this thing or this concept.
Which is why when I use the spell suggestion in D&D, I always cast tongues on myself first. So I always have access to any possible expression in one word.
There you go.
Well, there is a concern for southern Louisiana Cajuns. The Creole dialect there is dying out because they can't find any kids who want to learn it, because that's something old men speak.
Pikey? Does anyone still speak Pikey?
I have no idea. Yeah, maybe. Anyway,
I know that they're trying to reintroduce Cornish in Cornwall.
Yeah.
But,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and there was a period of time where the native language of the Maori in New Zealand was dying out, and they had the government got together and made this huge grant to try to teach it to people, and so it's in better shape than it was. Yeah.
But we have around here, we have schools that teach Salish.
Really?
Which is a Native American language.
Yeah.
And so I've actually substituted
Native American languages also have that problem.
Yeah.
By the way, for fun. Oh, sorry.
I've substitute taught for Salish classes, and the kids in there were not interested at all.
No, that's the problem. Nobody cares.
A shame.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
real quick. I want everyone in chat and all the fellow co-hosts to go look up. I think it's either the Cree or I think it's Ojibwe word for blueberry pie. It's just do it.
How do you spell it?
I was gonna say
just say
spelling. Oh,
I see James has found it.
Mini bashki mashinagi bit too.
Not even.
No. And I'm not even halfway through it.
Oh my God, Johnny Anonymous has it in chat. Jesus Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So there's a joke you sometimes see in online circles from Ojibwe where like, you know what? I really want to learn my language. And then they show an image of this is blueberry pie in your language. Yeah. It's like, you know what? Never mind.
Yeah. No.
Somebody else's job.
It's a joke. Then they actually do make an effort. And of course it takes time and practice. So there is an actual pretty significant push these days to actually for the communities to not only reclaim their language, but to also try and teach some of us ignorant ass settlers at least a few words. So now you actually have, at least in my area, a few Canadians who at least know Miigwech, which means thank you. But that's it. But it's better than nothing, which is how it was before. So there are pushes. I know there's a few universities across Canada now also offering Indigenous language classes that are proving to be relatively popular. They're not the hottest topic ever, but reasonable enough that it seems like they're going to continue for some time, which is good to see. I always love whenever Indigenous languages come up. It's quick, blueberry pie and Ojibwe.
I was not.
Yeah, it looks daunting.
Yeah,
I was not able to find a translation for blue waffle in Ojibwe.
Oh boy.
Anyway, we should probably actually get back to the 36 lessons.
We're on sentence 3.
Before we do that, I did want to ask an Elder Scrolls related question, which is this. In Daggerfall, you could learn multiple languages, and there was kind of a point to it, but not really. The question I would have is, in all Elder Scrolls games since 3, every NPC basically speaks Imperial Common, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
What impact do you think there should be in the Elder Scrolls universe when a language is no longer spoken?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay, so I actually have a ton of thoughts on this.
So are we talking?
Go for it.
Are we talking about in-universe languages or
in-universe languages? Yeah. Yeah. So let's say for a moment that Yokudan is suddenly no longer spoken. It just dies out the way languages die out.
It's sort of implied to have already done that, actually.
A little bit.
In a few places.
Okay.
Oh, am I supposed to go now, or did Chris?
Yeah,
still
go for
have
it.
some
Yes,
more?
go
Okay,
go
all
for
right.
it. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that I've been doing as part of my like long running other like Elder Scrolls writing project is I'm telling the story of like between the Red Guards leaving Yokuda and arriving in Hammerfell and setting it up. At this point in time, it's confirmed that there's at least like several other languages that are being spoken, and I wanted to play on that a bit, which means I've had to learn fictional languages and also how they're supposed to like merge and then lead to other things. And let me tell you, even though I'm not a linguist, I can tell you right now, shit does not make sense in terms of how like the language families are supposed to all come from Elnifex. I'm like, buddy,
Nope.
even if I use that as like Indo-European, this shit does not work. Okay,
No,
like
not at all.
I can only stretch it so far, and so that's been extremely infuriating. So already working with the fact that like the devs clearly did not have any linguists in the room. What I can tell people is that then like working on that and recognizing that there's no way I can fix that without utterly changing all of Elder Scrolls language, I'm working within that frame of mind. The idea, of course, is that common, while it's English for most of us or whatever language you're setting up for the UI when you install a game, the idea is that that is the common language and it's meant to be imperial, which is Latin. The Bretons are supposed to clearly speak a form of French that came from somehow magically Celtic languages, which is a little difficult to do if you know that they're different language families. So yeah.
Although, if I remember rightly, the word Breton comes from Beratu, which is the word for half in Elnifex. But anyway.
Yeah, and again, Elnifex is a goddamn mess. And yeah, so like again, I have my issues with all of that. But that being said, the Elder Scrolls comes it's what I like to call so close and yet so far, because the official storyline is that the Yokunins came and they only spoke Yokunin because obviously. And then being surrounded by other people whose language they didn't speak, and it's implied that Yokunin is actually like a very difficult, almost like, you know, like this sort of like mystical orient, very difficult language to learn, as like an in-universe Breton is writing about it. The idea is that the Red Guards just started learning the language of their neighbors to better facilitate communication and trade. And I'm like, you know what, Elder Scrolls? That's actually very close to what normally happens. The problem is that it usually goes both ways, at least to an extent. And so you don't see in Valenwood, in Cyrodiil, in, you know, parts of like the ports of the Somerset Isles, or of course in High Rock, you don't see, and even like Skyrim, you don't see that kind of exchange of certain words, even if it's just something that they might actually, you know, find really relevant. The only one, which is for the purposes of storytelling, is the new name Redguard, which comes from Regatta, meaning forebears.
Now, doesn't that mean red wave?
See, that's the problem, is no one actually fully agrees, and there's different interpretations, and it's a goddamn mess. Okay.
I think, am I right in that the only really surviving Yoku words are generally place names for some reason?
So, and this brings us to the second part of my rant, because your boy ain't done.
Okay.
The second part of this is that it's also implied that, again, because it's mostly actually the forebears who took the language, because the forebears who mostly ended up in the areas closest to the other points of trade. So like Sentinel, Rihad, and so it's like, this is why, like, you know, we decided just to start speaking their language. And I'm like, you know, really what it should be is Redguard should be speaking a Creole language.
Right.
Redguard should have what's basically like, because like the way, obviously one of the more famous Creoles in the world is Jamaican patois. It's arguably the most well-known. And that is where you have a ton of English vocabulary on top of West African, for the most part, West African grammatical structures, such as the Akan language. So that's kind of how it should have been in an Elder Scrolls setting. So like when you talk to a red guard, you should see words that just don't make sense, or like they say words that you recognize, but they're kind of in more of like a Jamaican Creole patois thing, because that's actually what would have realistically happened in a real world scenario. And so I'm like, damn it, Bethesda, you were this close, so close, yet so far. They even got some of the like Caribbean aesthetics of the Red Guards in the Red Guard adventure series. And it's like, yeah, hey, so you clearly understand part of what you're trying to tell. So where's my Creole? Damn it.
Nah, too much to hope for, man.
Yeah.
That's the con languages are really okay.
Final point, and then I'm finally officially done with this. So then, like, the final point is that part of the idea with like Yoku and everything is that because it's the sort of more historic traditional language, the crowns who are like super traditionalist, aka conservatives, they can't let go of that, and so that's like, we speak Yoku in this household, whereas Forbers are like, old man, get with the times, you got to speak the common language, which is English, aka Imperial. Like that's the official separation, which again you would think would then mean that the two Red Guards would not be able to talk to each other because one's doing the old language and the other one is like, hey man, what's going on, yo? This is that new Imperial slang. And like the old Yoku dude is like, what are you saying, child? I will beat the serpent out of you. Like, you know, like that's kind of the dynamics that you would think would happen, but they aren't. So yeah, language in Elder Scrolls is actually a goddamn mess. I hate it. That's what's bothering me too.
Which is why it's necessary for us nerds to come in with our headcanon.
Oh
no.
So you're saying that
Big medium-sized no on that.
So you're saying the Taagra project should not exist?
I love the Taagra project.
I think that's actually really good, and I actually like that, you know, linguists in Elder Scrolls are inspired to like actually work on this stuff, and I've seen some brilliant work on the Imperial Library actually breaking down some of the languages, including Yoku, which is like, all right, just gonna add that to the list of resources I'm going to use for this writing project I'm doing. Thank you very much, other random people on the internet.
But unfortunately, publishing it on the internet,
the whole collective thing just doesn't make linguistic sense.
And unfortunately, publishing it on the internet almost guarantees that it will not end up being referenced in a game, for the same reason that the writer's strike is currently happening in the U.S. Because it is very tricky to attribute payments.
TES does have a history of using fan submissions for stuff, specifically. Daggerfall's lore books come to mind.
Yeah,
because those were almost entirely fan written,
and that is probably not going to ever be a thing again.
I think there is
Microsoft is
there is a the most recent example I can think of that is Lady Nerevar's picture of Alessia, which became a statuette. I don't know of any other recent examples.
Yeah.
Well, also, the thing about Lady Nerevar is she's with Michael Kirkbride, and Michael Kirkbride has worked a lot on Elder Scrolls.
There are channels to facilitate her specifically in terms of sorting out the complexities.
And
that's fair enough.
They could have had her sign a document, etc., etc. But when you're talking about the like a language project contributed by hundreds of nerds, there's just an incredibly expensive amount of paperwork that would have to happen, and you would have to get everybody's sign off who contributed absolutely anything. It's just a mess. It's just a fucking mess.
Anyway, we should actually get back to back to things.
Do not go into the realm of apology for absolutions.
We've missed some, I'm sure. We've not talked about the wise may substitute one law for another.
Oh, okay. The wise may substitute one law for another, even into incoherence, and say that he is working within a method. This is true of speech and extends to all scripture. So this is it's just a comment on on exactly what we've been talking about so far. It's the wise being people who are replacing written word all the way into until laws become so completely tangled and complex that they're basically incomprehensible. But you can still say that you have a logic and a method to the way things work, and that is basically the opposite of working within the state of hysteria without fear. You can still go back and say, this is where it came from. This is where it went from point A to point B to point C to point D. Whereas if you're creating in the state of a dragon break, in the state of Hysteria, you don't have that reliability anymore. You don't have that logic.
Yeah,
And
it also links to the idea of truth again, because to get Aristotelian for a second,
yes,
you have two potential models for truth. You have the idea of correspondence and coherence, that something is true if it corresponds to the nature of reality, as in, you can talk about the sky is blue. Is the sky actually blue? Does that correspond with the nature of the sky as a reality? And then you can also talk about coherence. So you can say, well, does something logically make sense? Does it logically follow that 2 + 2 = 4, etc.? So you've got different models for establishing truth, and this is sort of leaning on the idea of you can substitute one law into another, even into incoherence is an interesting phrase that kind of clued me into that one, but it feels like this is going with a coherence model of truth, because you can then just stitch everything together and say, if this is the case, then this is the case, then this is the case, then this is the case, and just kind of substitute everything in. It becomes a kind of, to use a really basic idea of it, it just becomes just kind of bad syllogism logic that that if, say, if as an example, all pieces of cheese are more intelligent than warrior poets, and then if Meg the cat is a piece of cheese, then Meg the cat is more intelligent than any warrior poet, and so that logically makes sense. Yeah, that logically makes sense, but it doesn't cohere. It doesn't correspond to any realities. So that's pure coherence. But you can get incoherent coherence, if that makes sense, because it doesn't correspond. And you're still working within a method. You're still applying logic, and so on. And this is true of speech, and then extends to all scripture. So both written and spoken, and so on, can then just sort of just become pure gibberish in some way.
If it gets too complex,
yeah, I'm not sure how. And then it's to kind of link it back to the idea of the third walking path. Is it that the idea that if it becomes gibberish, that you can then use and leverage somehow, then never mind that it doesn't actually make full sense.
It doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to, so long as it works. I was thinking there was some sort of something I've been watching lately kind of go vibes on those themes, but I can't brain enough to think about it at the moment. If it comes to me, I will suddenly have a total non sequitur moment in cast later.
Okay. Well, we don't allow those here, but you know.
Sir, why are you lying?
So
yeah.
Do not go to the realm of apology for absolution. Beyond articulation, there is no fault. So what we figured this meant was, do not apologize and hope to be forgiven. Beyond articulation, in other words, beyond the person who expressed the thought, there is no fault to be found. Furthermore, an apology does not represent a position that can be argued and therefore cannot be defeated. So think about how infuriating it is if you are arguing with somebody and they just keep apologizing.
An apology is an argument, though.
Is it?
Yes. If you say, I'm sorry, that's not an apology. An apology is a defense, is a reason for you doing a thing.
I think that might be a difference that's being made here, is that there is no reason, there's no reasoning happening in the apology that I think that is being suggested here.
Okay.
The apology I think that's happening here is just, I'm sorry.
Because I was going at it from the other way. I was going at it from, if this is the realm of apology, if this is the realm of justification for why you did a thing,
right,
then you do not need to be forgiven because you did the right thing. So you don't get absolution. You don't get forgiveness because you don't need forgiveness.
Well, I think that it has to do with the rest of the paragraph here, which is the adjacent place where the grabbers live is the illusion of the vocal or the middle realms of thought, by which I mean the constructed. Still not 100% sure about what that means.
Is that? I mean,
but to wrap it up, this is how I stole the certainty of the Chancellor of Exactitude, perfect to look upon from every angle. When you come out of the vocal, you can never be certain. So I think what Vivec's trying to say here is that if you apologize, you don't offer a statement that allows an attack. See what I mean? So what Vivec is saying here is that the way that they defeated the Chancellor of Exactitude was that the Chancellor of Exactitude made a statement. And the second you make a statement, you can then, another person can then argue it.
Yep.
But if all you do is apologize, then no statements are being made and there is no argument.
Oh, so apologies aren't propositions. Okay.
I think that's what's being suggested here.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not. It's just I'm sorry. That's it. That's the full apology, I think. In this scientific statements can be contradicted. Sure. But this is in linguistics much more. Okay.
Because any statement can be an assertion that something is the case, and that can then be challenged. Whereas if you are just saying saying no, I was wrong, then that's moving into pure negation. Apologies are negation. Can we work with that?
Yeah, we could. Since truth can only be found outside the realm of perfection, the moment you express a thought through speech or writing, you compromise that perfection, and in so doing, you lose the truth. This loss of truth can therefore be exploited by the previously mentioned madmen to create a new interpretation of truth or a new conceptualization of it. So
that's to do with linguistic drift.
Well, we're talking about Nietzsche at this point.
Okay.
A uniformly valid and binding designation is inverted for things, and this legislation of language likewise establishes the first laws of truth. For the contrast between truth and lie arises here for the first time. The liar is a person who uses the valid designations, the words, in order to make something which is unreal appear real. He says, for example, I am rich, when the proper designation for his condition would be poor. He misuses fixed conventions by means of arbitrary substitutions or even reversals of names. If he does this in a selfish and moreover harmful manner, society will cease to trust him and will thereby exclude him. What men avoid by excluding the liar is not so much being defrauded as it is being harmed by means of fraud. Thus, even at this stage, what they hate is basically not deception itself, but rather the unpleasant, hated consequences of certain sorts of deception. It is in a similarly restricted case that man now wants nothing but truth. He desires the pleasant, life-preserving consequences of truth. He is indifferent towards pure knowledge, which has no consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in this respect, truth is just a function of language.
Yes.
Without language, there can be no truth.
There can be no articulatable truth.
Yeah.
When I see,
But which brings us to the next section, and I want to get to it really, really quick. 4, the truest body of work is made up of silence, as in the silence that results of no reference. So if each word in language is a reference to a concept, then in order to avoid making a reference, you must remain silent. If every word refers back to the concept's original form, as in Plato's theory of forms, then the dawn, where all dragon breaks lead, is the point at which forms can be created.
Yeah, but if all language is based on meat, then there are no forms for language.
So the issue is that when you articulate something, which he says when you come out of the vocal, you can never be certain. When you articulate something, when you vocalize something, you've removed certainty because certainty is truth, and you have attempted to encapsulate certainty.
It's when you come out of the vocal, when you write something down. When something is no longer vocal, it can't be clarified.
I thought it was like when you come out of the position of the vocal.
Yeah, no,
that's how I interpreted that.
Yeah, because you write down a word and the meaning can change over time. So the whole designation of just bizarre little fact for you: the King James Bible, when it talks about souls, that they were talking about physical things because that's how you translate the Hebrew. And when you hear kind of how many people were on that ship, that's several hundred souls. They're talking about people because that was the referent when the King James Bible was being written. But we don't talk about souls now in that way, and so you get some mixed messages because when words are written down, it doesn't make sense. Which comes back to the whole idea of you need to translate Shakespeare into modern language in order to understand it. Because even though they're using the same words, they don't mean the same thing in some ways, and so. From that perspective, that also can be come back to the whole the wise can substitute one law for another, even into incoherence, because you can do the same. You can do precisely that. You can substitute words out, and they will mean different things, and so it won't make sense anymore. Wasn't sure where I was quite going with that, but I think it. Well, I hope
I feel like we're near something here.
Yeah. Yeah. Hang on. And because the adjacent place to is the illusion. And can we get something about? Oh, hang on. What happens if we start translating the vocal in this sense into the experience of the game? Because if we get back into the adjacent place being Lig, being the kind of the original idea of Tamriel that never was, that previous idea of Tamriel being the illusion of the vocal, the illusion of the thing you experience in the game.
Right. It was vocalized but never solidified.
Yes.
It's a little gamey-wamey, but I like it.
Yeah.
There's something in there.
Well, I find myself taking it a step further.
Okay.
I mean, and this might be a bigger thing about Lig. I mean, could Lig be an idealized version of Tamriel? Because as soon as you put something out, right, it becomes imperfect. But Lig was never distributed. Does that make sense? Like
it certainly is now. Lig, as it existed on that map, does not exist anymore, and it's a utopian version of Tamriel. At least that's how it exists in the mind of the developers, as I would imagine it.
Maybe,
but Lig doesn't exist in that way in the Arabis now. I'm not sure that we could describe Lig in the Arabis as an ideal world.
I'm going more meta.
Yeah, so are we.
Yeah, fair enough.
I would suggest that it's probably hard to talk about the adjacent place without getting meta.
Yeah.
As much as I would like to, I don't think it's really possible. But like I strongly suspect that what we're observing with the grabbers and their behavior is the need of Lig to be realized, to become real. We're going to see that with City Face later. And the attempt of Lig to become materialized, to become a real thing, is it's sort of the will of that of the adjacent place, of that dream, to try to become a real thing, and so it's stealing parts of Tamriel to try to create itself.
Yes, because the adjacent place is the constructed. Going on just purely on the grammar of that sentence, the adjacent place is the constructed, so it's something that has been deliberately built, and so taking things from everywhere else. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I mean, I've long had an idea. I mean, back when I cared more about canon arguments. There was this idea that I had that we all share this idealized version of Tamriel. We all have these ideas that we have in common, like Tamriel is a place, Lake Rumer is a thing, the White Gold Tower exists. This is like the base information about the setting, the things that we all kind of understand. But then as soon as you get away from those broad strokes, it's different for everybody. And we all experience it in different ways. So, but that core essence of what Tamriel is, and we all know it to be, could that concept itself be Lig? And I recall reading where there are bleeds between Lig and Tamriel on occasion. And I wonder if that's just a device to, someone had a batshit idea. We're going to throw it in. Yeah, it came from Lig.
It bled from Lig into Tamriel. Yeah, sure.
Mojo isn't still in chat, is he?
No, he's not. I don't think.
Gone.
Yeah, this really is more his territory.
Yeah.
So by the word, I mean the dead. We wanted to talk about it. Here it is.
Yes.
How is it? So that this comes after the truest body of work is made up of silences, and the silence that results from no reference. How does that connect to by the word, I mean the dead?
Because the dead are silent.
Well, I was thinking earlier, what if when we see these phrases, by the word I mean the dead, jumping back to the dichotomy of conflict versus diplomacy, what if the dead is the purpose for the word? You're engaging in diplomacy, in negotiation on behalf of the dead to protect them, maybe. I mean, if it's done Mary culture, I mean, ancestors are very important. So I kind of want to go back and look at all the other instances where by the sword I mean blah, by the word I mean blah, and I want to go see if that makes sense with that lens. I might do that later.
Yeah, but I'm also inclined to think that if we're talking about the written word, which kind of it feels like that's the thing being made here, that that the word in this sermon is the written word. I hope that's not too much of a leap, but it's also the idea of the written word is that you are is the dead communicating with us anyway.
I like that. But as you were talking, I was also thinking once the words are written, they are dead.
Yes.
Whereas if you simply speak them, they're living, they're changing, they're nebulous. And,
well, they exist within a particular context, and the context within which words are spoken are forever changing, which we've been through.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's Sermon 6 you guys are looking for.
Aha.
I would also like to get a little meta at the moment with interpretations about language, and by the word I mean the dead. Think about how we treat and revere dead people, and or how we use them and how we interpret them for our own purposes. So as a very big example, when I say, a memorial, like a memorial to the dead, what's usually conveyed? It's something relating to great victory in an ancient battle. Why is the battle important? Whatever reason or reasons are listed. And that's why it's important that we honor the memories of the dead. We also tend to use the dead as examples of like, oh yeah, look at these, great men and or women who helped build this country and its vision. Like they're used to like sort of uphold certain ideals without necessarily being the word for that ideal or even its ideal representation, but they're used as symbols or as something full of intrinsic value and or meaning. So that's another way of looking at it in terms of, by the word I mean the dead. So what do the dead, either in just the sermons or throughout all of Tamriel's history, represent? What's the story or the importance being told? Maybe it's also related to the biggest and most notable of the dead, whose body orbits the sky. Just saying.
Fifth, the first meaning is always hidden.
Yeah, I vaguely want to say something about something I'm sure Thomas Jefferson said, but I'm not sure that that's relevant.
Yeah. So the first meaning is always hidden. This is I interpreted it as going back to the idea of Platonic truth. The first meaning of something is unknowable.
Okay, yeah.
I got a hair in my mouth. The realm of apology is perfection and impossible to attack. Thus, the wise avoid it. This is what I was talking about before.
Yep.
Trinity and unity is the word and is the world and word of action, the third walking path. I'm pretty sure this is again confirming that the third walking way is the way Almsevy was formed.
Which would be an antiomorph, right?
The Almcivi is an enantiomorph, but the way that Almcivi was formed was through the manipulation of a dragon break.
And they talk about, when they go Voltron in the later sermons, they do talk about another walking
the
path.
sixth walking way, I think.
Isn't the scarab that becomes the new man, or am I thinking of a different one?
That would be Jubal.
Well, because the scarab I always interpreted as piggybacking on Lorcan, which the tribunal did.
Yeah, the sixth path. Each of the aspects of Almcivi then rose up together, combining as one, and showed that. Okay, so my explanation of the sixth path was the combination of souls, which is also the way that Numidium was formed.
Yes.
Yeah. And then Numidium is soul stacking.
As is the tribunal, which is an interesting piece of dichotomy, but that's when we get to the last bit. So let's talk about that then. Sorry, that was my mistake on remembering which word it was.
But theoretically also Talos.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is
it bad that I haven't thought about Talos Trinity in a long time?
Yeah, I know, right? The sage who suppresses his best aphorism, cut off his hands, for he is a thief.
And I adore thieves.
Yeah.
Does this link with cutting off of hands?
I don't think so.
When you meet God.
Well, it can and it can't because the thief goes to defeat God.
The thief also goes into the secret tower.
Yeah, but the cut off his hands for he is a thief, that's a reference to the ancient various ancient cultures cutting off people's hands if they're thieves.
Why is that making someone a thief if they suppress their own work?
No.
What?
Okay. Read it carefully. The sage who suppresses his best aphorism, cut off his hands for he is a thief. Break it down bit by bit. So it's actually talking about the sage suppressing the aphorism about cutting off the hands in terms of being a thief potentially for godhood, because it's the sage who has enough wisdom to recognize that that's how you have to beat God.
I disagree.
Okay, well, you're welcome to, but I like that interpretation of like the sage who's suppressing his best aphorism about cutting off hands is like, well, it's my secret knowledge to take and steal and then, use for my own purposes because I am the sage. I am wise.
The sage is the thief because he's suppressing his best aphorism. He's not sharing his wisdom with us.
Yeah,
therefore.
I think it's how you interpret the colon there.
Language and interpretation. Yes, here we go again.
Cutting off his hands is referring to the sage. That's what seems the case.
Maybe.
Anyway, it's puzzling,
word, right? Maybe.
But it's hard to ignore the connections with the rest of the mention of thievery and hands in the sermons.
And then what was it? I quoted a sword meeting earlier. It was Vivec. Vivec.
I am fond of thieves. Yeah.
Yeah, because he and Cyrus have
Vivec is a thief. Yeah. So the clothes of the broken map are worn only by fools and heretics. I think I confirmed with Kirkbride that this is a reference to a piece by George Louis Borges. Borga, which is called Exactitude in Science. It's very short. Here it is. Like a lot of Borges stuff. In that empire, the art of cartography attained such a perfection that the map of a single province occupied the entirety of a city, and the map of the empire the entirety of a province. In time, those unconscionable maps no longer satisfied, and the Cartographers Guild struck a map of the empire whose size was that of the empire, and which coincided point for point with it.
Yeah.
The following generations, who were not so fond of the study of cartography as their forebears had been, saw that the vast map was useless, and not without some piddliness was it that they delivered it up to the inclemencies of sun and winters. In the deserts of the West, still today, there are tattered ruins of that map, inhabited by animals and beggars. In all the land, there is no other relic of the disciplines of geography. So, the clothes of the broken map are worn only by fools and heretics. This is it goes on to say the map is an exit for laziness. It is the dusty tongue, which is to say the given chart that most take as a story that is complete. No word is true until it is eaten. So
feels like it's also a commentary on like the maps in the games, and you're only allowed to go so far.
Possibly, but I think that the idea here is that we talked briefly about clothes in the 36 lessons and mantling being like the taking up of a mantle. So it's the clothes of the broken map is it could be a reference to Lig and the coffee stained map of Tamriel. It could also be a reference to. It could also be a comment about pitilessness. I'm still trying to say that word. And it could also be a reference to people who depend too much on definition and certainty. Yep. The map is an exit for laziness. In other words, if you depend too heavily on documentation and explanation and mapping and certainty, then it is the dusty tongue, which is to say the given chart for that most take for it as a story that is complete. A dusty tongue is a tongue that's not used.
Yeah. It's where there's nothing left to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's a lack of creativity. It's a storyline that most take. It's a chart of a story that most people consider to be complete. So again, it's very hard for me to not slam right back into the idea of Lig as a fools and heretics and the lazy think about think about the broken map of Lig as something that is complete, that is finished, but it is not finished. No word is true until it is eaten. So that people have to consume the word of Lig for it to become true.
It is both untrue because it was never consumed, it was never processed, it was never whatever, but it's also finished.
It's in limbo, kind of.
Yeah. It was also finished because it is ended. It is no more.
So it's not true until the Sacy come and eat it.
Yeah.
More or less.
Also, incompleteness, vague statements can be true if approximate, exactingly precise statements are false because they are wrong in minutia. Very good point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very good
point. And
I've
just realized we haven't actually talked about anything to do with the word and God and scripture and so on.
Yeah.
So, did we want to kind of unpack that now?
Please.
As to where that's going, because that was sort of an idea of within John's gospel. It sort of talks about the word was with John's gospel begins with, in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. He was with God from the beginning. And later it carries on with, and the word is Christ, and then later on is that the word became flesh and dwelt among us, and so on. So you have that idea of that kind of spiritual idea. It's not a coincidence that a lot of Gnostic gospels take their inspiration from John.
Even though he was shitting on the Gnostic gospels most of the time.
Yes.
And it's is Jesus the traitor? What?
Yeah.
And it's so when John talks about like the word of God being Jesus,
yes.
It seems to me like there's a connection being made between, or a concept being formed by the communication of God to man as the word, as what God communicates, as what God speaks.
Yes.
But when God speaks about what God wants. So or what God or what God knows to be true, or what reality is, because God is reality, and therefore, so when God speaks, God is speaking truth. So
Yes.
you can say that the word, the expression of God's thought, of God's mind, of God's will is the direction I'm trying to drag this in.
Right.
Is the word. And so therefore Jesus is as the word is the incarnation sort of the will of God.
Yes, because he was there to fulfill a purpose in line with what God wanted for the whole of creation.
Yeah, Lotero is onto something here. Word is logos, which is a bunch of connotations in Greek. Yeah, there's a lot of logos was used by a lot of Greek philosophers in ways that is very complex, and I do not understand it. And there's only so many esoterica videos I can watch in one day, so I'm still working on it. I'm getting my comparative religion from Dr. Justin Sledge here.
Do I remember that the Pythagoreans had a big thing about the logos as something, but I can't remember. They kind of held it almost as the ultimate mathematical principle of the universe that should never be. I don't know whether it should never be invoked or something, but the Pythagoreans had a bunch of odd prohibitions.
They were strange in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is very, very accurate. The Pythagoreans had a fun culture of...
Fun's a diplomatic way of putting it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm being nice when I say that.
Yeah.
I mean, it is fascinating to read about the various kind of ancient Greek, I guess you could just really call them cults. So like Pythagorean, Socratic, Platonic, it is actually a fascinating read, but it also really explains like, oh yeah, wow, what we like to imagine as Western culture in many ways has fundamentally shifted, and in others is pretty much the exact same it's been since ancient Greece. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
The graffiti dicks everywhere.
Well,
okay, so that's just a common, human thing, but I was thinking more along the lines of like some charismatic dude comes around, says some stuff, and gets a community of people who feel ostracized and think, oh yeah, this makes sense, and then like it's a coin flip about whether it becomes a weird sex thing or not. Like that is apparently a tale as old as time, turns out.
Okay, so what you're saying is Waco is just a bad habit of Western civilization.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Okay.
It's part of the double-edged sword, I guess.
Okay.
It's but there is there's therefore a connection that I think can be made here between the nature of existence of like I try so hard to do this sometimes and I feel like I'm almost there and I never quite make it. There's a connection to be made here between the will of God and the concept of the universe, of existence, and magic. Magica in Elder Scrolls as being a radiation or perhaps the essence itself of Aetherius, the highest plane of existence that mortals can comprehend. And the use of language, or the use of an language, like Elnifex, or for that matter, the use of any language by a sufficiently powerful entity, and reality itself. So magic and language being sort of the same thing.
Well, yes, because especially if you look at like texts like Reality and Other Falsehoods, it's basically saying that in order to make alteration magic work, you need to persuade the universe that it should be a particular way.
Right.
And persuasion is a linguistic endeavor.
A linguistic concept.
Way.
Yeah. So, and that like, and linguistics, by which I mean communication, does not necessarily have to happen by speaking. As we know in Elder Scrolls, you can cast a spell without an incantation.
Yes.
But it also says interesting things about Thuum, as Thuum might just be another form of alteration magic in the respect that you are altering the way the earth bones vibrate.
Yes.
Do we know that spellcasting doesn't require verbal components?
My character in Skyrim never said a fucking thing when I was casting spells. Not one fucking thing.
If you had to use a Thuum...
I think that brings us to game mechanics versus...
Yeah.
True. That's true.
Because silence in Elder Scrolls 3 stops you from casting anything.
Yep. As Torter just pointed out. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So, I mean, not that fucks up my point, but but it does. I think that it's just when I make that connection, it still feels tenuous, and I think I need to find an in-game text somewhere that says it better than that, or backs me up on that, or something. But in the meantime, the ending of the words is Omsivi, which is about, I think, in this sermon, basically explains the way that language and communication and manipulation and the manipulation of truth in the context of a dragon break creates the third walking way. I think this is one of the few times we actually get it kind of spelled out to us, and as much as anything is spelled out in the various lessons.
Emphasis on the kind of, yes.
Yeah.
It's as good as we're gonna get.
Tonal magic is distinct from alteration because it doesn't use magic. Oh, good point. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These magic
I've always separated tonal magic from the more conventional schools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's 27. That means the next sermon is 28, which is going to be new territory for me. I have not yet completed my commentaries on 28, so we're all going to do it together.
Excellent.
And that's fine because 28 is about the ready man. Just not that complicated. Yeah.
No.
Right.
But we are going to spend a good amount of time talking about brutality and what Vivec calls complication. And we get to learn a little bit more about Nisus, the village. Okay. Thanks everybody for showing up. Thanks for everybody who subbed and followed. I really appreciate you guys. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Everybody wave bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.